I was built in 1855. I worked hauling freight and passengers from Atlanta to Chattanooga. We were the first engines the WARR and Northern Georgia knew. We were fabulous machines, flying down rails through open pastures and towns, blowing smoke haughtily and pounding the rails with all our might. People would come from miles away to hear our shrill whistle and listen to our song. Look at me, must be fast, come along, must be fast. Rushing through the beautiful Georgian countryside was a thrill. I love watching birds and butterflies. Sometimes a jackrabbit or a coyote would race me down the track. The beautiful fields and blooming flowers made an engine glad to be alive. As we would steam down the track, we could see cows, donkeys, mules, pulling carts and horses pulling carriages. We would look at those creatures and scoff. Useless creatures. We can pull far heavier loads faster. Your days are numbered. Unlike many of the younger engines, we replaced horses and mules, not older and out-of-date locomotives. Often our arrogance would manifest when passing through a town or stopping at a station. We would see a beast of burden and we steam at them, often startling them. Sometimes they would run away and hurt the humans who cared for them. I remember once I scared a horse pulling a wagon so bad he ran into a smith's shop. The fire from the forge spread to the hay in the stable and burned down a house. The guilt and remorse I felt was incredible. I realized that I would never act so foolishly again. Any further hard feelings I could harbor would be eternally squelched on August 11th, 1856. A wagon of cotton bales had caught a wheel on the track outside Big Shanty. It was a blind curve, and by the time I rounded the bend, it was too late. I still shudder to think of the accident and the fate of that poor animal. I need not divulge gory details, but I then gained my first understanding of life and mortality. I arrived at Moon Station a much wiser engine. Yonah was sitting in the siding, waiting for me to pass. He quickly picked up on my mood and asked what was happening. He was very sympathetic and kind, even though we always argued over who was stronger and faster. He told me to talk to Florida. Florida had a similar accident before. I told Yonah that I couldn't because I had been so vile to him and the other engines. To my great surprise, he retorted,
"'Tis all in good jest, my young friend, all in jest. Florida and I bantered much the same when we built this line. Just speak to him."
That night when I reached Chattanooga, there was Florida.
"Why the long face there, General? After all, you're only 2 hours late. I thought you were the fastest and more reliable than us antique kettles."
I said nothing, just sat looking at my cowcatcher. Florida stopped smirking and gave me the most deep, cutting, terrifying stare. He looked deep into my smokebox door and down my tubes. He saw into my soul, you could say. His expression softened a little. We spoke no more for a few minutes. The late-night passenger and mail train was being loaded. Florida broke the silence in his booming grandfather voice.
"Something happened to you today, didn't it?"
I said nothing, just looked down.
"My dear engine, you have me starting to worry,"
he insisted. "Yonah said you'd understand, that I should talk to you," I mustered.
"Talk to me about what?"
Florida asked. "He said you had an accident like mine, with a horse," I explained. He let out a slow wheesh and only said, "Oh." We sat there for a few more minutes.
"They're almost unloading, but I want to say that, yes, I have. It was when we were building the tunnel. There are a lot of workmen, wagons, horses, mules, equipment, tools and things. blasting, I dropped off some rails and ties and was dragging back some of the rock and soil when the workers set off a charge of dynamite. One of the horses was scared and charged towards the rails. The engineer was helping us back onto the gondolas, and when the blast went off, he looked away. My driver misunderstood the signal and opened the throttle. My driver saw the blast and some rocks falling and accidentally opened the throttle all the way. That poor horse had charged between my flatbed and the gondolas. It was a few seconds before they stopped me and didn't realize what had happened to that poor horse.
As Florida became quiet, I gasped in horror and disbelief. I saw his eyes narrow and his boiler became cold. I started to ask him more about the horse when he spoke.
Much worse happened on the railway building the line, but the guilt I carry stays with me. They say that what happened wasn't my fault, and it was all in the name of progress, but those experiences still leave scars in my firebox. Maybe that's why I've always been such a contentious old goat to you youngins.
He looked at me softly. Well, I spoke. I'm sorry I've been an arrogant, boastful brat. He grinned and laughed.
You should have heard me when I was a new engine. Or maybe it's best you don't. Embarrassing stories, those.
I smiled. My boiler had never felt so warm, and my fire never burned as bright as it did that night. Florida set off with his train, and I saddled down to rest up for the morning.
Thou wilt come no more, gentle Annie, like a flower thy spirit did depart. Thou art gone, alas, like the many that have bloomed in the summer of my heart. Shall we never more behold thee, never hear thy winning voice again? When the springtime comes, gentle Annie, when the wildflowers are scattered o'er